My sister called me at 7:42 p.m. and told me my husband was in surgery after a severe accident, her voice shaking like she was watching him die. And I remember gripping the edge of the kitchen counter so hard my fingers went numb because Daniel was sitting right in front of me, calmly eating takeout and asking if I wanted extra sauce. And for a second I actually wondered if I was losing my mind, but then she said his name again, full name Daniel Carter, said the hospital, said the doctor, said they didn't know if he would make it, and I felt something cold slide down my spine because she sounded too real, too detailed, too certain for this to be a mistake. And when I looked back at my husband smiling at me like nothing was wrong, I realized something was very, very wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I stared at Daniel for a long second, waiting for something to shift, for something in his face to crack or change, but he just looked back at me with a confused smile, chewing slowly like he was trying to figure out why I had gone quiet. And I could still hear Sophia breathing on the other end of the line, fast, uneven, like she was standing in a hospital hallway, and I said, "Sophia, stop, just stop for a second," because my voice did not sound like mine anymore. It sounded thin, distant, like it was coming from someone else entirely. "Daniel is here, he is sitting right in front of me." And there was another pause, longer this time, and then she said very clearly, "Emily, I am at St. Mary's, I am looking at his name on the board right now, they took him into surgery 10 minutes ago, I watched them wheel him in." And something in the way she said it made my stomach twist because she was not guessing, she was not confused, she sounded certain, and that certainty was worse than panic. I pulled the phone slightly away from my ear and looked at Daniel again, really looked this time at the way his shirt sleeve was rolled up, at the small scar on his wrist from years ago, at the exact way he always held his fork, all the tiny details that made him him, and nothing about him felt wrong, nothing felt fake. And yet my sister was describing something that should have been impossible. And I realized I did not know which version of reality I was supposed to trust. "Put her on speaker," Daniel said, his voice calm but firmer now, and I hesitated for a second before I did it, placing the phone on the table between us, and Sophia's voice filled the room, echoing slightly in the quiet apartment. "Emily, where are you? You need to come now, the doctor said the next hour is critical." And Daniel leaned forward, his brows pulling together. "Sophia, this is Daniel, I am right here. What are you talking about?" And there was a sharp inhale on the other end, like she had not expected to hear him, like she had not expected him to speak at all. And for a moment nobody said anything, the silence stretching in a way that made my chest feel tight. And then she said, slower this time, more controlled, "That is not possible." And I felt something drop inside me because those were the exact words I had just said. Daniel let out a small laugh, the kind he used when something did not make sense. "Okay, this is weird, maybe someone made a mistake at the hospital, wrong name or something." And I wanted to believe that, I really did, because it was simple, clean, logical, but Sophia spoke again, cutting through that idea before it could settle. "Full name Daniel Carter, date of birth matches, address matches, insurance matches, everything matches, this is not a mistake." And I felt my fingers curl into the edge of the table as a cold, steady fear started to build. Not sharp, not explosive, just heavy and quiet. The kind that settles into your bones. Daniel's expression changed slightly then, just a flicker, something small but noticeable, like a thought had crossed his mind that he did not want to say out loud, and I caught it, that tiny hesitation, and it made my heart start to beat faster, because Daniel did not hesitate like that, not about simple things, not about facts, and I said, "Daniel, do you know anything about this?" Trying to keep my voice even, trying not to let the fear show. And he shook his head immediately, too quickly. "No, of course not, this is insane." But something about the way he said it felt off just slightly, like he was reacting to more than just confusion, and I could not explain why that bothered me so much. Sophia spoke again, softer now, almost pleading, "Emily, please just come here. If this is some kind of mistake we can figure it out together, but if it is not, you need to be here." And I closed my eyes for a second, trying to steady myself, trying to make sense of something that did not make sense, because if I stayed I was choosing the version of reality in front of me, the safe one, the one where my husband was sitting across the table alive and fine, but if I went to the hospital I was admitting that there was a second version of him somewhere else, one that was hurt, one that was real enough to have records, to have doctors, to have my sister standing there waiting, and I did not know which choice was worse. When I opened my eyes again, Daniel was watching me closely, like he was trying to read my decision before I made it, and that made the unease in my chest grow stronger, because suddenly it did not feel like a simple choice anymore. It felt like a test, like whatever I did next was going to change something in a way I could not take back, and I realized with a quiet certainty that made my hands start to shake, that I was going to have to go to that hospital, no matter how impossible it sounded. Because not going would mean pretending none of this had happened, and something deep inside me knew that pretending was no longer an option. I grabbed my keys without realizing I had already made the decision, my hand moving on its own like my body understood something my mind was still trying to catch up to. And I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound sharp in the quiet apartment, and Daniel stood too, reaching for me. Emily, wait, this does not make sense, let us just think for a second. But I was already shaking my head because thinking was the problem. Thinking was what kept looping me back to the same impossible place, and I could not stay there any longer. I needed something real, something I could see with my own eyes. I have to go, I said, my voice quieter now, steadier in a way that scared me because it meant I had already committed to this. If it is nothing, I will come right back, but if it is not. I did not finish the sentence because I did not know how, and for the first time that night, Daniel did not argue. He just looked at me, really looked like he was trying to decide something, and then he said, I am coming with you, and that made something in my chest tighten immediately. No, I said too quickly, the word coming out before I could soften it, and his expression shifted again, that same small flicker I had seen before, the one I could not quite name, and I forced myself to explain. If there is some kind of mistake, it will be easier if I just go and check. I will call you the second I know anything. And for a moment it felt like he was going to push back, like he was going to insist, but instead he nodded slowly, almost too easily. Okay, he said, stepping back. Call me as soon as you get there. And something about how quickly he agreed made my stomach twist again, because Daniel was not the type to just let things go like that. Not when it involved me, not when it involved something this serious. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, my heart beating faster with every step, and as I reached for the handle, I felt it, that strange hesitation, like something invisible was holding me in place for just a second longer. And I turned back to look at him, standing in the kitchen, the overhead light casting a soft shadow behind him. Everything about him still so normal, so familiar, and for a second I wanted to stay. I wanted to laugh this off and sit back down and pretend none of this had happened, but then my phone buzzed in my hand. A text from Sophia that simply said, Emily, please hurry. And that was enough to push me forward. The drive to St. Mary's took 12 minutes, but it felt longer, every red light stretching time in a way that made my chest feel tight, and I kept glancing at the passenger seat, half expecting Daniel to be there even though I knew he was not, and my phone sat in the cup holder silent now, which somehow made it worse because the silence gave my thoughts too much space, and they started to spiral in ways I could not control, running through every possibility, every explanation, none of them fitting, none of them making sense, and the more I tried to force logic into the situation, the more it slipped away from me. When I pulled into the hospital parking lot, the bright white lights made everything feel too real, too sharp, and I sat there for a moment with my hand still on the steering wheel, staring at the entrance like it might give me answers before I even stepped inside, and I realized I was afraid not just of what I might find, but of what it would mean if it was true. If there really was another version of my husband inside that building, one that matched his name, his details, his entire identity, because that would mean the man I had just left behind was something else, something I did not understand. I forced myself to move, pushing the car door open and stepping out into the cold night air. And as I walked toward the entrance, my footsteps felt heavier than they should have, like each one was carrying more weight than the last. And when the automatic doors slid open, the smell of antiseptic and the low hum of hospital noise wrapped around me immediately, grounding me in a way that made my heart start racing again. I spotted Sophia near the front desk almost instantly, pacing back and forth, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, and when she saw me, she rushed over, grabbing my hands without hesitation, her grip tight and cold. Emily, thank God you are here, she said, her eyes searching my face like she was looking for something specific, and I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. Where is he? And she pointed down the hallway toward the surgical wing, her expression shifting into something I had not seen before, something that was not just fear, but something else underneath it, something controlled, something deliberate. And that was the moment my hands started shaking again, because I realized she was not surprised to see me come alone. The hallway felt longer than it should have, each step echoing too loudly against the polished floor as I followed Sophia toward the surgical wing. And I kept expecting something to stop me, a nurse, a voice, anything that would tell me this was all a mistake, but nothing did. Everything continued like this was normal, like I belonged there, like my husband was actually somewhere behind those double doors, and that quiet acceptance from the world around me made it worse than panic, because it meant this version of reality existed whether I understood it or not. They took him in about 20 minutes ago, Sophia said as we walked, her voice calmer now, almost rehearsed. And that calmness pressed against my nerves in a way that made it hard to breathe, because just minutes ago she had sounded like she was falling apart, and now she was composed, steady, guiding me forward like she had done this before. What happened? I asked, my voice low, careful, because I was starting to notice things, small things, the way she avoided looking directly at me, the way her grip on my arm tightened slightly whenever I slowed down, like she was making sure I kept moving. Car accident, she said quickly, too quickly. They said he came in unconscious, internal injuries, they rushed him straight in. And I nodded slowly, even though something about that explanation felt thin, like it was missing pieces, like it had been put together in a hurry. We reached a waiting area just outside the operating rooms, rows of empty chairs under harsh fluorescent lights, a television mounted in the corner playing muted news that nobody was watching, and a nurse behind a small desk typing into a computer, barely glancing up as we approached, and Sophia stepped forward before I could say anything. "We are here for Daniel Carter," she said, her tone confident, practiced, and the nurse nodded immediately, turning the screen slightly toward herself, scanning something, then typing again. "Yes," the nurse said after a moment. "He is currently in surgery, family can wait here. The surgeon will update you when there is news." And I felt the air leave my lungs in a slow, quiet exhale, because hearing it from someone else, someone official, someone who had no reason to lie, made it real in a way that nothing else had. And I gripped the back of one of the chairs to steady myself. "Can I see his chart?" I asked, the words coming out before I had fully thought them through. And the nurse hesitated for just a second before nodding again, turning the monitor slightly so I could see. And there it was, his name, Daniel Carter, his date of birth, his address, our address, every detail exactly right, laid out in black and white like proof that could not be argued with, and my vision blurred for a second as I tried to process it, because this was not just a misunderstanding. This was not a simple mix-up, this was something built on real information, real data, something that had been set up carefully enough to pass through a hospital system without question. "Is everything correct?" the nurse asked, her voice neutral, routine, and I nodded automatically, even though nothing felt correct, nothing felt real, and I stepped back, my hands trembling slightly now, and I turned to Sophia, searching her face for something, anything that might explain this, but what I saw there made my stomach drop even further, because she was watching me, not with panic, not with fear, but with a kind of quiet focus, like she was waiting for a reaction, like she had been anticipating this exact moment. "Emily," she said softly, stepping closer. "I know this is a lot, but you have to stay calm." And the way she said it, the tone, the control, it did not match the situation at all. And that was when something shifted inside me, something small but sharp, a realization I could not ignore anymore. I pulled my hands away from her slowly, taking a step back, creating just enough space to think, and I said, "Sophia, how did you know it was him?" And she blinked just once, a quick flicker that most people would have missed, but I saw it. And in that split-second hesitation I knew not everything, not yet, but enough to understand that whatever was happening here, whatever version of my husband was behind those doors, Sophia was not just a witness to it, she was part of it. I held her gaze for a long second, waiting for her to answer, but she did not right away, and that silence said more than anything she could have told me, because Sophia was never quiet, not when she had something to say, not when she thought she was right. And the fact that she hesitated now, even for a moment, made something inside me settle into a cold, steady certainty. "I asked you something," I said, my voice calm, quieter than I expected, and she finally looked at me fully, her expression smoothing out into something controlled, something practiced, like she had just decided which version of herself to show me. "The hospital called me," she said, her tone even, almost too even. "I am listed as an emergency contact." And I blinked, the words not making sense at first, because that was not true, that had never been true. Daniel had only ever listed me. We had filled those forms out together, carefully, intentionally, because we both agreed that family should not be involved unless absolutely necessary. "No," I said slowly, shaking my head. "That is not possible, I am his only emergency contact." And for a second something flickered in her eyes again, something sharper this time, like annoyance slipping through the calm. "Well," she said, folding her arms lightly, "then maybe he changed it and did not tell you." And that landed harder than I expected, not because I believed her, but because of how easily she said it, how quickly she placed doubt between me and my own husband, like she had been waiting for the opportunity. I felt my chest tighten, not with confusion anymore, but with something else, something closer to anger, but still held back, still controlled, because I needed to understand what was happening before I reacted. Why would he do that? I asked, watching her carefully now, every movement, every breath, and she shrugged slightly, too casually for the situation. I do not know, Emily, maybe you should ask him. And the way she said him made my stomach twist, because there were now two versions of that word in my head, two Daniels, one sitting in my kitchen, one behind those doors, and I did not know which one she meant anymore. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay grounded, and I glanced back at the nurse's desk, then at the hallway leading to the operating rooms, trying to piece things together in a way that made sense, but every path led to the same impossible conclusion, and I realized something else then, something I had missed in the chaos of everything, something small but important. Sophia, I said again, softer now, and she looked at me, waiting. When did they call you? And this time she answered too quickly. About 30 minutes ago. And I nodded slowly, letting that sit between us, because 30 minutes ago, Daniel had been sitting across from me, laughing about something trivial, completely fine, completely normal, and if that timeline was true, then whatever was happening here had started before she ever picked up the phone. That is strange, I said quietly, almost to myself, and she frowned slightly. What is? And I met her eyes again, holding them this time, not letting her look away, because 30 minutes ago he was at home with me. And the words hung there, heavy, undeniable, and for the first time since I arrived, I saw it clearly, not just a flicker, not just a hint, but a crack in her composure, small but real, and in that crack, I saw something I could not ignore anymore. She knew. Not just about the call, not just about the hospital, but about the contradiction itself, about the fact that two realities were colliding in a way that should not have been possible, and instead of being confused, instead of questioning it, she was managing it, guiding it, shaping it in a direction that kept me moving forward without ever giving me a clear answer. Emily, she said again, stepping closer, her voice lowering slightly, more intimate now, more controlled. You are in shock, you are trying to make sense of something that does not make sense, but right now what matters is him. And she gestured toward the operating room doors, her expression shifting back into concern, into urgency, but I did not move, not this time, because something inside me had finally caught up with everything else, and it was telling me very clearly that I was not just here to check on my husband. I was here because someone wanted me here, because someone needed me in this exact place at this exact time, and that someone was standing right in front of me. No, I said quietly, taking another step back, creating space again. What matters is why you called me. And the air between us changed instantly, the tension sharpening, tightening, and for a brief second neither of us spoke, the sounds of the hospital fading into the background as everything focused on that one moment, that one question, and I realized with a clarity that made my pulse slow instead of race, that whatever answer came next was going to change everything. She did not answer me right away, and that was all the answer I needed, because the silence stretched too long, too heavy. And when Sophia finally spoke, her voice was different, no panic, no softness, just something flat and controlled. Because I needed you here. And I felt the last piece fall into place inside me, not with a crash, but with a quiet certainty that made everything suddenly clear in a way it had not been before. Why? I asked, even though part of me already knew this was not going to be simple, and she exhaled slowly, glancing toward the operating room doors before looking back at me. Because whoever is in there, she said carefully, they used Daniel's identity, his information, everything, and when the hospital called, they needed confirmation, someone close enough to verify details, and I knew you would come without asking too many questions. And I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying, because it was not just about a mistake or a coincidence, it was something planned, something intentional, and I felt a quiet anger begin to rise, steady and controlled. You lied to me, I said, my voice low, and she shook her head slightly. I did not lie, I just made sure you would show up. And that distinction, the way she separated those two things, made something inside me shift permanently, because it told me exactly who she had become, and exactly where I stood in her world. You used me, I said, and this time she did not deny it. She just looked at me, calm, unapologetic, like she believed she had done the right thing. And in that moment I realized something even more important. This was not just about her. This was about every time I had ignored the small signs. Every time I had let things slide because they were easier to excuse than confront. A doctor stepped into the waiting area then, calling the name Daniel Carter, and both of us turned, but I did not move forward, not right away, because something inside me had already shifted, and I knew that whatever happened next, I was not going to be the same person who walked into that hospital. The man in surgery was not my husband, not really, just someone who had used his name, and the man sitting at home was still my husband, still real, still mine, but the truth between me and Sophia, that was something else entirely, something that could not be undone. I spoke briefly with the doctor, confirmed what needed to be confirmed, and then I stepped back, letting the situation move forward without me, because I had already made my decision, not about the hospital, not about the stranger behind those doors, but about her, about us. I left that night without saying much more, and when I stepped outside into the cold air again, I felt something I had not expected. Not relief, not exactly, but clarity. The kind that comes when something painful finally makes sense. Life now is quieter, simpler in ways I used to think were boring, but I have come to understand that peace is not something you stumble into. It is something you choose, something you protect, even when it means walking away from people you once trusted. I do not speak to Sophia anymore, not out of anger but out of understanding, because sometimes distance is the only boundary that truly holds, and Daniel and I, we rebuilt what needed to be rebuilt, slowly, honestly, without pretending nothing happened, because pretending is what breaks things in the first place. If you are listening to this and something in your life does not feel right, even if you cannot explain it, trust that feeling. Do not silence it just to keep the peace, because your clarity matters more than anyone else's comfort. And you deserve relationships that do not require you to question your own reality. Thank you for staying with me through this story, truly, because sharing it was not easy, but knowing someone out there might understand makes it worth it, and I would really like to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment where you realized someone you trusted was not who you thought they were? And if this story touched something in you, you can show your support in a small way. Only if it truly resonates with you. My name is Emily Carter, 31 years old, and the lesson I want to leave you with is this. Never ignore the quiet truth just to keep a loud lie alive.